Over the last 20 years, CEU has become a global university with students now drawn from 134 countries and faculty from 40. We offer graduate-level studies in social sciences, humanities, law, and business, and we're building a new school of public policy, an expanded center for media and communication studies, which is the center at CEU that is at the heart of this conference, and cutting-edge programs in cognitive science and network science, which relate very directly to what we're doing here today. One of our most renowned programs is the Open Society Archive, the official archive of the Index on Censorship, a preeminent global watchdog on freedom of expression. We have the largest samizdat collection in the world, starting with underground publications from the Soviet Union in the 1920s, a testament to the struggle for free expression in the most dangerous of times. Like the internet, CEU crosses all borders. We have no single dominant nationality among our students or faculty. We like to think of ourselves as a crossroads university where all parts of the world come together. We have 9,000 alumni around the world in key positions in policymaking, government, business, media, and universities. Now, we all know that promoting free expression is, as history shows, hard to gain, easy to lose, and always a struggle to keep. It's a complex struggle because it involves competing rights, like the right to privacy, and competing interests, like security, that sometimes conflict with free expression. Now, I personally have been involved in this struggle for most of my career. I was a U.S. civil rights lawyer during the Watergate era, challenging government censorship of publications like the Pentagon Papers and government wiretapping and surveillance of private citizens by the Nixon White House and intelligence agencies. Later, as a law professor and vice president at Harvard, I defended scientific researchers whose work was being censored by the U.S. government on national security grounds. Then, as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, I encountered the complexity of free expression issues when official radio broadcasts in Rwanda and Yugoslavia in 1994 were being used to promote genocide. I felt that the response in this rare case should have been to try to stop the genocide by jamming the radios. A very hard choice, and one that maybe some in this room might not have made. And I only wish that that choice had been taken so that lives could have been saved. The struggle to protect free expression has been led by activists, but it must also involve the broader civil society, the private sector, and government. It's always a struggle of competing interests and tensions, but in the end, if free expression is protected, so are democracy and open society. Internet at Liberty 2010, our conference, is all about this struggle. Our focus will be from the ground up, not from the top down. And I think here are some of the questions we'll be asking ourselves over the next 2 days. What is the state of internet liberty from the point of view of those who are trying to exercise it? What do we mean by online free expression, and how can it be promoted and protected? What are the dilemmas and challenges facing each of us, the stakeholders who are represented here, bloggers, NGOs, companies, governments, and academics? What are our hopes and fears about the internet at a time of change and upheaval in the world? And above all, how can the internet be used to advance human freedom at a time of great uncertainty about the future? I'm now delighted to introduce David Drummond, the Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Counsel of Google, and I want to ask all of you to join me and my colleagues at CEU, Kate Coyer, Ildiko Moran, and Istvan Rev, in thanking David and the entire Google team especially Bob Borston, who is, you just heard from earlier, warming up the microphone, Deere and Gillen, for being such great partners of CEU and putting on this conference. So, David, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, John, and it's great to see all of you, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I do want to start by thanking John again and CEU for helping to organize this event. You know, their efforts have really made it possible for all of us to spend the next couple days learning about the promise and the peril of free expression on the internet. It's really been a privilege for us to work so closely with you and to work so closely in this great institution. So I'd like to welcome all of you as well, and thank you for coming. We've got a great group of activists and folks here who think a lot about this problem, and people who've traveled here from Armenia to Kazakhstan, from Brazil to Zimbabwe. So we truly have a global representation here. Our goal from the beginning has been to make this global and to bring activists from all around the world, from traditional NGOs, academics who are studying what free expression means in the digital age, and officials, pretty importantly, officials from the private sector and the public sector and from governments. So I welcome everyone to the conference. I'm David Drummond, and despite the tie, I work at Google. You know, I've got this long title that doesn't really fit on my business cards, but you know, the next 3 days, I want everyone to think of me, and for all of us to think of each other as colleagues, truly as colleagues in the pursuit of the common goal of achieving the promise of a free, open, and safe internet. Simply put, when services are blocked or filtered, users of internet platforms everywhere just can't be served effectively. And that's why Google and other companies try very hard to maximize free expression and access to information. We do our best at this, even though we sometimes, actually a lot of the times, make some mistakes. And in one effort to promote transparency, you'll see this during the conference, Google's building some online tools that allow our users to see where governments are demanding that we remove content and where our services are being blocked. We actually think that this kind of transparency can be a powerful deterrent to censorship. Now, I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that as we gather here this morning, we're standing at the crossroads in the future of the internet. Unless companies, governments, and individuals do something about it, we're likely to see this open internet that we all have been accustomed to ever more restricted, taking choice and control away from the user and putting more power in the hands of those who would limit access to information. The number of governments who actually actively censor the internet has grown tenfold, from about 4 back in 2002 to around 40 today. And just as importantly, we've gone beyond sort of firewalls and the typical ways of censoring content and seen governments develop what we think are pretty sophisticated tools. We all know that on the day of the Iranian elections last summer, the regime in Iran simply turned off the switch. No more text messaging, no Twitter, no Facebook, no Gmail. And we've also got countries like Turkey and Russia and China, all talking about building their own state-sponsored and presumably censored search engines. Clearly then, the spectrum of global threats is wide and there's a lot of work to be done. From the moment we began to plan this conference, we really thought that it shouldn't be an episode or an event, but rather the beginning of a new effort to bring together people like you to help really find the concrete steps that we can take to achieve our common goal of keeping the internet free. Many of you started this process yesterday at the practical workshops, and I urge you to continue to contribute your ideas in the process. Ultimately, we're going to have a website for the conference, and we hope that that will become a discussion and action forum where virtual planning to bring about some of the changes we want to make will continue. Now, as I close, I'd like to ask everyone in this beautiful space to take a moment to honor those who've given their lives, those who are serving time in jail as punishment simply for expressing their ideas and their opinions. And as we take that moment, consider the story of one such activist who wanted to be here today and was told, in essence, not to come. This activist sent us an email, and in the email, the activist said, actually told about a journey really worthy of Franz Kafka or Gogol. It led from one government office to another office and to another one. And at the end, it was always the same result: don't come. Let me read you a quote from the email. Everywhere I turned, I was only talking to a repetition of the same monomaniac mind, where all the key words around the conference were defined as dangerous and forbidden: liberty, access, internet, Google, and even such simple words as university, conference, and Europe. Upon a second investigation, I realized that they're not afraid of these things because of their intrinsic identity, but because they can transform me from a passive and obedient member of the mass to a free, critical, creative, and active subjectivity. So again, welcome you all here, and now we're going to proceed with the first panel of our session, which is called A Moment in Time, A Very Short History of the Internet and Free Expression. Thanks very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Renata Uitz. I'm a professor of law at... Here? Good morning. My name is Renata Uitz. I'm a professor of law at CEU at the Legal Studies Department. A warm welcome from CEU. My first task is to introduce the main presenter of our first session on the history of Internet and censorship. Please give a warm welcome to Rob Faris from the OpenNet Initiative.
Great, good morning. I hope you can hear me. I'm Robert Faris. I'm the research director at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and I'm thrilled to be here. Many thanks to the folks at CEU and Google for organizing this event. Pardon me. In my remarks today, I'm going to draw heavily on the research and the thinking of my colleagues at the OpenNet Initiative. I'm going to be in 10 minutes or so giving a brief history of internet content regulation. So a bunch of smart people invented the internet. Another person added the World Wide Web, and soon tons of people were saying, hey, this is great. We can share recipes for cookies. We can share tips for gardening and for knitting. We can create groups to share science fiction. Then millions of other people said, hey, you know what? The internet is great for porn as well. Others offered up ways to more effectively commit suicide. Others offered up recipes for making bombs. Others called out, others found their calling as internet trolls, making fun of people, making fun of religion and national leaders. On the internet, we have the good, we have the ugly, and we have the illegal, and a whole lot of it. Just to pause here for a minute, I think it's very, very important to be able to understand how we would draw a line between that which is illegal and that which is offensive but legal, and also consider who is it that we would task with drawing that line, making the distinction between that which is offensive and perhaps very, very offensive, and that which is illegal. Meanwhile, the countercultural libertarians were telling the government that they had no sovereignty over the internet. Governments, of course, begged to differ, and started to think about how to rein in unwanted activity on the internet. This, in effect, ended the open era of the internet. US Congress wrote legislation to block pornography on the internet. The Supreme Court said, no, sorry, you can't do that. Congress rewrote the legislation. The Supreme Court came back a second time and said, no, you can't do that. That's infringing upon protected speech. The ultimate compromise that we have in the United States is quasi-mandatory filtering in schools and libraries. US companies had meanwhile invested in creating filtering software to help those that wanted to limit internet access control, whether it be governments or parents seeking to protect children. Other countries liked this idea and adopted internet filtering. Saudi Arabia, in fact, had held back on wider deployment of the internet until they could install a filtering solution for the country. Iran was an earlier adopter of internet filtering. China produced its own solution for that. An interesting counterpoint is Singapore, which worked on an aggressive plan for internet filtering and ultimately decided to only symbolically block a small number of sites. Filtering spread over the next several years. When ONI carried out its first global survey of the internet in 2007, we found more than 24 countries significantly filtering the internet. We'll note that filtering in almost every one of these cases relied on the active participation of the intermediaries, in this case, ISPs. This era of expanding internet filtering marked the first generation of internet controls. The second generation of internet controls is characterized by the addition of a set of complementary controls. A first step for many was to strengthen the legal framework for controlling internet speech. This included regulation and licensing requirements for internet publishers and service providers. Some have even attempted to require bloggers to register. Introducing liability for intermediaries also falls in this realm. Cybersecurity and copyright are also important parts of online speech regulation. A very different tactic is targeting takedown requests, where web hosts are within the influence of the government. This is, of course, of limited effectiveness as internet content is easily moved overseas. Another approach is to go after the writers and content producers themselves, at times threatening them or with physical harm or even arresting them. We've unfortunately seen this tactic adopted in several countries. A different approach is cyber attacks against websites and their hosts. Over the last several years, we've seen an increase in DDoS attacks and hacking attacks against activist and independent media sites. Along with filtering, this is one of the few strategies for going after content which is hosted overseas. Along with the introduction of these strategies, countries continue to expand and refine their filtering strategies. Another trick we've observed is an increase in filtering around key political events, such as elections. We've seen this in Yemen, in Bahrain, and in Kyrgyzstan. Filtering of search results is another approach, China being the most notable example. Argentina joined their ranks last year based on an unusual court ruling. During most of last year, a search for Diego Maradona and several other political figures using the Argentine version of Yahoo's search engine yielded 0 search results, as per the demand of the courts there. This second set of the second generation controls offers states a much wider set of tools that can be dialed up or dialed down to suit their needs. It offered them tools that were more variable. Meanwhile, the internet continued to evolve. The rise of social media, including video and image sharing sites and social networking sites, complicated matters further. Unlike ISPs, these intermediaries are most often outside a country's jurisdiction, and it's not easy to enlist their help. China is an exception in this regard, as they have domestic alternatives to foreign social media sites and have been able to enlist their help in policing online content. Thus, they're able to block overseas services that won't play along while retaining domestic substitutes that are monitoring for unwanted content by the services themselves. This creation of national cyber zones marks the third generation of internet controls. So this third generation, these controls are likely to be less directly under the control of the government and represent a foray into an area of contestation. Another example of this third generation of controls is government-sponsored information campaigns that are trying to sway not the way in which not whether online content is there or not, but the way in which it is received and interpreted by people within the country. The most prominent examples of this are the pro-Kremlin bloggers in Russia and the 50 Cent Army in China. So those are 4 stages I've outlined for you: the open internet period, Generation 1, Generation 2, and Generation 3 policies. Looking forward, I think there's a few interesting things for us to keep our eye on. We've seen an increase in filtering in Western countries. Though primarily focused on child pornography and extremist sites, I wonder if this is signaling a possible increase in the acceptance of internet filtering. We're still waiting to see what Australia is going to do. There are several persistent issues with internet content control related to targeting, transparency, and accountability. None of the strategies I've discussed here fully address the targets of content regulation. Many of the strategies take out legitimate speech along with targeted content. There are not any of the governments offering blocking lists for public review or comment, and the granular level of filtering decisions are often carried out by third parties, by software developers themselves. Oversight and supervision are generally weak. In those countries that have adopted strict internet controls, these controls are typically carried out by executive decree with little involvement of legislatures and the judiciary. One thing that every country around the world has in common is that they struggle with the technical, the political, and the social elements of internet regulatory policy. In all of these examples, I believe we're seeing governments go as far as they can, taking into account both the political costs of carrying this out and also the political costs of inaction as well. A solution in many of these places is to err on the side of greater openness. In other places, we see them erring on the side of more restrictive policies. I don't believe that the debate is over in any of these places and that all the current solutions represent compromises that are very uneasy and uncomforting for most involved. Finally, I think that the role of intermediaries, particularly social media sites, is increasing over time. That it's raising the risks and the responsibilities for them. As more and more speech is taking place on social media and blogging platforms, these platforms themselves are governed by terms of service agreements that users must abide by. In some cases, these terms of service agreements are more restrictive than the restrictions in place in the governments where people are using the internet. In other places, they're much less restrictive. In either case, we have these 2 overlapping sets of restrictions on content. I'd recommend a paper that was just posted on the OpenNet website yesterday by my friend and colleague Jill York on this very topic. Second, authors in part are choosing a regulatory regime when deciding on a hosting platform, and many understandably elect to host content in countries with higher speech protections and greater protection from the scrutiny of their own governments. This locates these companies in a very important and awkward position in the world at this point. I think we can broadly divide solutions into 2 camps. One of them is domestic solutions for managing internet content. In many cases, this might also coincide with the balkanization of the internet, which I hope we won't see. As the internet continues to be an international medium, I think we're going to increasingly need to look for international solutions, and this is certainly uncharted territory. And I look forward to hearing from the others on the panel about how these different things are represented and thought about in Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, and India. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And at this point, we are expecting our co-panelists on the stage. While they arrive with their chairs, please allow me to introduce them very briefly. First, we will have with us, in the order as they are shown in the program, Tattu Mambetalieva from Kyrgyzstan, from the Civil Initiative on Internet, and she will be speaking to us through an interpreter. We will also have with us Sunil Abraham from India on behalf of the Center for Internet and Society, And our third panelist will be coming from Pakistan. His name is Shahzad Ahmad from Bytes for All. So please expect them to show up very shortly. And the first round of the discussion will center on their experiences with internet censorship and the responses of their initiatives to local experiences. Okay, so welcome everyone. And first request the panelists to share with us some of your experiences with the very different roles in your own countries. Rob mentioned a wide range of censorship attempts, from content restriction to access restrictions targeting internet service providers and also speakers, editors, and bloggers. What would be the most recent developments which you think the world should be alarmed of?
Okay. It's working? I'm sorry, I will speak in Russian. Hello, everyone. Меня зовут Тату Мамбеталиева.
My name is Tattu Mambetalieva.
И я работаю на
Is it working? Yeah. Okay.
Я работаю на неправительственную организацию гражданской инициативы интернет-политики.
And I work for the NGO Civil Initiative on Internet Policy.
И мы являемся частью большой сети неправительственных организаций, которые объединяют все 10 стран СНГ и называется Eurasia iPolicy Network.
And we are the part of the big company, big organization, Eurasian iPolicy Network.
Мы также работаем в проекте ONI.
We also work with ONI,
OpenNet Initiative. И мы проводим различные виды мониторинга на доступность интернета, на свободу распространения информации, на вопросы фильтрации.
And we constantly monitor internet on the issues of accessibility, regulation, and filtration.
Рассказывая очень коротко об истории развития интернета в наших странах, я хотела бы вначале вспомнить. Вы можете вот так, да? Я бы хотела вспомнить о том, как Джим Демси, один из создателей нашего вот нетворка, который работал в CDT. Вы переводите.
Let me tell you briefly the history of the internet in my country. And I remember 2000 year when the founder of our network SDT, Jim Dempsey,
он сказал, я говорю, с чего начинать, чтобы развивать интернет? Он сказал, надо начинать с конкуренции интернет-провайдеров.
He said that we need to start working on internet with the providing competition between internet providers.
Мы это сделали, и мы действительно получили развитие интернета в наших странах.
We did this, and indeed, internet started to flourish in our countries.
В нашей стране, например, 800 тысяч пользователей интернета, когда общее количество жителей Кыргызстана 5 миллионов.
There are 5 million people in my country, and only 800,000 use internet.
И я думаю, что мы идем хорошим темпом в количестве, и у нас появились теперь новые проблемы, новые вызовы, которые связаны с развитием.
We are moving the right way, I suppose, but we also have new challenges on our way.
Цены на интернет остаются достаточно высокими.
The prices are pretty high in Kazakhstan for internet users.
И у нас безальтернативный выход на внешний мир. Мы работаем через Казахстан.
We are working through Kazakhstan. This is like our alternative access.
И политика Казахстана по фильтрации, соответственно, распространяется на нас тоже.
And the filtering policy in Kazakhstan also applies to my country.
За последние 10 лет у нас было 5 попыток приравнять интернет к средствам массовой информации.
Over the last couple of years, we have 5 attempts to make internet equal to the mass media.
Мы все эти инициативы приостановили.
We stopped all these initiatives.
Но сейчас мы можем констатировать такой факт, что во всех странах СНГ у правительства есть очень большая заинтересованность контролировать контент.
In the meantime, all CIS countries, governments of these countries have high chances to control internet.
Предпринимаются разные способы. Например, спецслужбы устанавливают систему прослушки трафика.
For instance, intelligence.
Что мониторинга.
They use monitoring systems for the internet.
Очень много инициатив появилось по безопасности детей в интернете. Под этим флагом используются разные механизмы для того, чтобы просматривать трафик.
There are various mechanisms to provide security of kids in the internet, and under these initiatives, governments try to control internet as well.
Но мы можем констатировать такой факт, что
Sunil and Shahzad, if these kind of controls, filtering mechanisms which affect network access from outside countries because of as a physical barrier to how networks are set up, and also secret service interventions and other measures are typical in your countries. That would be really exciting to hear about.
I was hoping to respond to the presentation that Rob made before I went into details of censorship in my country. In America, there is 0.8% of Muslims. In India, there is only 1% of Christians. In India, on the television, we have 3 channels dedicated to Christian preaching and evangelization. And in America, during my several visits, I've never seen a single national channel on all the television sets on Islam. So I really wonder, when I constantly hear this preaching from, on freedom of expression from civil society members in developing countries, whether they are actually employing double standards, whether they are getting caught up in this new discourse around freedom of expression, which is really masquerading freedom of expression as a human rights issue when it is really a trade issue. The second thing is, if you look at Article 19 very closely, you will notice that the article says that access to knowledge is the precondition for freedom of expression. And again, this message we get from developed countries is it's all fine to talk about freedom of expression in the political realm, but the moment it begins to impact the revenues, the royalties, the rents we are able to collect from our intellectual property, that is when we have a problem with it. And all the surveillance regimes, the deep packet inspection regimes that they want to put into place to protect their intellectual property actually is used by governments in our parts of the world to crush freedom of expression. So I wanted to point out on these 2 fundamental differences in the way non-profit organizations, civil society in the developing world and in the developed world frame this debate. I will just focus on 2 examples of blocking in India. There are a wide set of reasons why we need to be concerned about how freedom of expression is being undermined in India, but I'll just focus on 2. The first is, in India we have something called the daughter deficit. There is a strong preference for the male child, and sex determination is used in order to kill the child in the womb. We call that feticide, the girl child in the womb, or to kill the girl child after she is born. That is called infanticide. And the Indian government, the High Court from Delhi, has asked Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft to block sex determination kits from their advertising in related searches. And this is something which civil society finds very hard to resist, because the daughter deficit is a serious problem in certain parts of our country. And this is an example where civil society will completely agree with the government position on blocking of web content. I'll now give you an example where civil society won't agree with the government. We have an adult comic strip in India, which is very famous. It's called Savita Babi. Savita is the first name of an Indian woman. Babi means sister-in-law. In India, there is a kind of cultural fetish where sister-in-laws are eroticized. And a psychiatrist advised the Indian government and said that this comic strip is more dangerous than porn. After all, porn is a specific representation of a specific woman. But this comic strip is an abstraction. And when young Indian males consume this comic strip, they will be able to abstract the concept and apply it to their own sister-in-laws. And therefore, that was one of the first adult websites to be blocked in India. And this is quite a bizarre understanding and policy process, and I just wanted to highlight that here as my first intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking on what Sunil was saying a while ago, I have to say that when all the developed governments, for example, from EU and the US, they have so much influence in our policy processes, in our day-to-day governance structures as well. Why don't they raise their voice when these governments, either the dictatorship or the elected governments, putting bans on freedom of expression, putting bans on people organizing against government for their rights? Probably it doesn't suit them at that time, and since they have to work with the governments for their own cause, that is why they just don't care about it. I should say that the censorship and blocking regime in Pakistan, because I will focus here the Pakistan and the Pakistan perspective from the civil society. It is really weird. It is bizarre. I mean, you would find that the first ever blocking incident occurred in Pakistan was February 2006, when they blocked Google Blogspot on the pretext of some caricatures, and resultantly the block continued for about 2 months. And since then, it was the period when dictatorship regime was in place, and then now, even though we have an elected government in Pakistan, but still the censorship and blocking mechanisms are in place. The weird thing about it is that they always block content. They always tell us that there is some blasphemous content out there in the web, on the internet. But whenever you dig it, whenever you further investigate it, you come to know that there always is a political reason for that. Even if they blocked caricatures, they blocked YouTube, they blocked Google, they blocked, I mean, there are ample and several incidents of blocking since 2006. But I mean, we have the evidence that it always was, though on the pretext of blasphemous content, but for political reasons. And the mechanism they put in place is, this is very sophisticated, again, provided to the government by our friends out there, because, I mean, we are allied and frontline state on war on terror, and they have their own interest on that. So, I mean, they block at URL level, at domain level, at IP level, and so, I mean, all these mechanisms are in place So, I mean, this is, I mean, we can further talk about it later.
Rob, do you want to comment on any of?
So those are all, can you hear me yet? Yeah. No? Yeah? How about if I talk really loud? I think that Sunil's points are very well taken, that different countries around the world frame these issues in very different ways and frame them by their own kind of their own cultural and history, and as well as their current legal framework, and that the United States certainly spends a whole lot more time talking about the freedom of religious and political speech and less time talking about access to information around the world. So I take that point very well. It falls into that realm where I think that we need to find international accommodation in a lot of these areas, and there's probably going to have to be a little give and push in either ways.
Работает. Я бы хотела одну вещь сказать. Несмотря на то, что применяются разные виды блокировок в наших странах СНГ, надо констатировать факт, что все сайты, порно-сайты, все сайты военизированные, которые, допустим, изготовление оружия и так далее, они остаются доступными. И блокируются только сайты политического характера.
She would like to say that despite all the filtering and all the filtering process, porno sites still exist there, and there are many websites with the content which can say you how to make weapon, something like that.
То есть получается, все-таки политика в наших странах СНГ такова, что контролируется только вопрос политики, свободы выражения, но общепринятые стандарты не срабатывают.
The policy in former Soviet Union countries is like this, that the content control regarding the political content is only control, while the rest is more or less free.
I'm hearing two themes from the discussion which are increasingly exciting. On the one hand, while Rob pointed out the diversity of the mechanisms which are available to silence and how they are defined by local conditions and local specificity. I mean, Pakistani blasphemy laws are famous for blocking all kind of dissent, not only religious but also political dissent. What it would be nice to talk about on account of these local, seemingly local divergences and local idiosyncrasies is how some of the large providers try to censor themselves in order to meet all local, potentially local requirements and to protect themselves from local threats and local litigation, irrespective. And that would put the threshold higher for the overall content and the overall speech which they would put out. Because, for instance, New York Times would not like to suffer negative consequences on how they report on the recent Quran burning incident in Florida, where the responses would not only come from within the US legal system, but there would be further non-legal repercussions from all corners of the universe. So there is actually a spiraling, chilling effect on some of the largest, biggest, most available content providers as a result of both local legal limitations and also the variety of local responses. And it would be interesting to see how aware of the various local speakers are of the international implications of what the content they might be putting out there, and who would you identify as the most vulnerable as a result of this self-censorship, which some of your contributors and speakers and also the providers, that is the ISPs who need to host the website, would be imposing upon themselves, irrespective of the legal regime which is applicable in a country.
Можно я попробую ответить? Я бы хотела сказать, что самые уязвимые, наверное, будут те страны, где нету собственной, как бы скажем, инфраструктуры, нету своих собственных спутников, которые очень зависимы от глобальных провайдеров. Это в первую очередь. И особенно уязвимы те страны, которые будут через другие страны, где тоже идет какая-то другая политика.
The most vulnerable are the countries which don't have their own excuse me, satellites. When they don't have their own systems, they don't on satellites and have access to the internet through their different countries.
Я вот здесь хотела сказать одну вещь, которая была бы хороша вот таким образом. Вы помните, когда раньше Средняя Азия работала через Китай, мы имели очень много трафика китайского.
Several years ago, the countries of my region were working through China.
И мы получали отфильтрованный интернет. Но когда мы начали разговаривать на уровне правительства и просить чистый канал, это удалось.
We had a filtered internet, and then we started talking on the level of the government and asking to open the internet, and we got it.
Я просто хотела поднять сейчас вопрос о том, что мы должны вводить стандарт, о том, что когда мы работаем и предоставляем какой-то другой стране интернет, да, что провайдеры и глобальные, и соседние должны предоставлять только чистый, неотфильтрованный интернет.
I would like to tell that when we start talking between the countries and signing the contracts, that providers should give unfiltered internet.
И каждая страна сама должна принимать решение, что фильтровать и что нет.
And every country should agree upon what they should filter and what not.
Sunil?
I wanted to focus on two examples of how self-censorship and kind of homogenization of morality happens on the internet. In the world of policy, we call it policy laundering. When a particular policy is developed in one country, for example, 3 strikes regime in France, and then other countries ape that particular policy position. On the internet, what we're beginning to see, both on corporate managed websites and community managed websites, is the phenomena of morality laundering. For example, on Twitter, there was a hashtag that began to trend from South Africa, and the hashtag was "What Darky Says." In the US, for African Americans, darky is a racial slur. So US African Americans protested to Twitter, and Twitter then blocked that particular hashtag. Of course, for South Africans, this was not a racial slur at all. It was something that they were quite proud of. So it becomes a very difficult problem for Twitter to resolve. On Wikipedia and on Facebook, we saw similar things happening. In the US, of course, you're not allowed to breastfeed your child in public, something that's very common in many other parts of the world. So Facebook began to delete photographs of mothers breastfeeding their children. And on Wikipedia, we noticed that all the pages that had to deal with human anatomy and sexuality that previously featured photographic illustrations were now slowly being replaced by diagrams. And again, if you were to look at European textbooks on anatomy and American textbooks on anatomy, you will know where that conflict is coming from. I think it's almost impossible to solve some of these questions of diversity in moral standards or ethical standards or religious standards. And the only way that communities and corporations could respond is by broadening their governance and by ensuring that somehow their user community from various parts of the world are somehow implicated in their governance systems. Thank you.
And responding on that, how these big companies respond to various challenges when we face those on ground. I would want to flag another issue, that is hate speech. I really don't know how to control that over the internet, but that is what is playing havoc to the internet in a lot of different countries, particularly in Pakistan. So for example, when Facebook was reported and they knew that this Dra Muhammad page is creating problems in various Islamic countries, despite their policy that is when you have complained at a certain number of applications or certain number of complaints you have received, you have to remove that page. They did not. and again probably in the name of freedom of expression, but it doesn't happen in various other cases. So resultantly, it created a lot of problems. Okay, for you, it is probably in the developed world or in the US, it is just an issue of freedom of expression, but there it becomes an issue of life and death. It becomes an issue of property loss. So I just want to say that there should not be double standards. If Facebook had this policy to respond to these complaints, they should have. And that was the major acquisition which all the extremists in the country took as a lead, and that resulted in major chaos. Who suffers? Common people. I can give you one example. Out of this Facebook block, they blocked everything. I mean, court ordered to block only the Facebook domain, but the proactive minister and the advisor to the government of Pakistan, and he was trying to perform, as best as possible. He went on to block 10,548 websites, and that included YouTube, that included Wikipedia, that included Flickr, that included various other websites which we use on daily basis. Who suffered? Those virtual university students who have 6,000 hours of videos on YouTube, which they have to use for their study. Who suffered? All those human rights workers or the NGOs or the people who have presence on Facebook or on other social networking websites. And they were benefiting out of it. And it was really difficult to convince people that this is, the anti-ban community was very little, was very small, and they were threatened for life because of these, few silly reasons. I don't know how to deal with it right now, but these double standards at times create real problems for people on the ground. Yeah.
To follow up on this comment, how important do you think it is to actually inform judges and decision makers and to make them aware about the technical part of spreading content and blocking content which they might be considering vicious or harmful? So this is not about the standards of morality, to which I would like to come back later, and whether internet spread hate speech is the same type of hate speech which you deal with when you see a public assembly out there. But first I would really like to talk about the technical conditions and whether internet service providers, the community, editors and bloggers, or who is best positioned to inform judges and other decision makers when they actually intend to go out and ban content.
Okay. Since we have experienced it very recently, so I would give you some feedback on that. On a 19th May, court ordered a Facebook ban, which resulted in massive ban of internet in Pakistan. I've already mentioned about it. Just to give you a bit of internet ecosystem in Pakistan, we have about 40 million internet users and about 1 million broadband users. And unfortunately, there is no real governance structures in place which can make sure how it functions. There is an elusive interministerial committee which should be governing all these issues, but no one knows about it. Who are the members, if they can do it, if they have capacity to do it. Anyways, when this case went to the court not only ordered to block these websites, in fact advised the government that they should take lead from China, Saudi Arabia and other countries, other friendly countries, that what kind of mechanisms they have put in place to block this content. So not only that, to block it, but all of you know that how, about the Great Firewall of China, that now court is ordering the government to put in place those mechanisms. So which is really problematic, which is really scary for everyone. So that is another issue that the judiciary and the lawyers as well don't know how it functions, how it works. So that creates a lot more problems.
I think we need to understand how it currently works. Since there is very little jurisprudence in this area, especially in India, the way it works is judges always look up to America and to European countries for precedents, and then they import that judicial precedents into the Indian context. In India, we haven't had much litigation over blocking of websites. Usually when websites are blocked, it is of hate group speeches, and NGOs find it very difficult to take up that particular cause. But what we must realize is increasingly these issues are spilling and bleeding into each other. The 4-step or the 3-step tests that are being developed to determine jurisdiction, for example, has a close connection to the test in the area of intermediary liability. So this is a large and complex problem. Who is training the judges today? If you go to National Law School in Bangalore, it is Microsoft that organizes the trainings for Indian judges on cyber law. So if you have a rights holder training judges, then you can imagine the impact. I'm not for a moment questioning the integrity or intelligence of Indian judges, but I'm saying that large vested interests with big wallets are in this business of training judges.
So just let me warn you, after Tattu's response, this will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions, so get ready.
Я бы хотела предложить рассмотреть немножко другой вариант. У нас есть прецедент, когда Узбекистан обратился к Yahoo и к Mail.ru выдать все данные тех, кто сидел в интернете из Узбекистана.
We have a case when Uzbekistan asked Yahoo to give the data of the users who was on Yahoo.
И когда все данные были выданы, было арестовано очень огромное количество людей.
And when the data was released, a lot of people were in prison.
И я думаю, что если бы у Yahoo и у Mail.ru не у Yahoo, Яндекс,
Яндекс,
да, если бы у них была политика, чтобы не выдавать эти данные, то, возможно, мы бы сохранили жизнь этих людей.
If they had a policy not to reveal this data, probably some people would be saved.
Я просто хочу сказать, что сейчас наступило время, когда такие контент-игроки, как Google, как Yahoo, и Mail.ru и так далее, они тоже должны создавать систему, свою политику по вопросам контента.
Nowadays, the big content players like Google, Yahoo, Yandex, and Mail.ru should create their own policy in
Потому что очень тяжело учитывать специфику каждой страны в интернете.
It's very difficult to get to know the special occasions of every country in the internet.
И мне кажется, это тоже вот игроки, которые бы могли бы определять правила игры.
And the players should set the rules in this case.
Спасибо.
So the audience has now opportunities to ask questions. Please.
Hi, my name is Zahid Jamil. I'm a lawyer. I'm from Pakistan. Thank you, Shahzad, for bringing up the Facebook issue. Here's a question. You mentioned that maybe training of lawyers and maybe judges and lawyers are understanding.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. To be louder. My name is Zahid Jamil. I'm a lawyer from Pakistan. And thank you, Shahzad, for bringing up the Facebook case, for instance. Now, having attended the court and seeing that this particular judge, for instance, would begin his court, unlike any other judge in the whole country, with a recitation from the Holy Quran. I'm not making a judgment call. I'm just saying that's the way he runs his court. Do you think, and let's keep another thing in mind, that he's also recently ordered that the foreign minister and the government of Pakistan should issue or table a resolution in this month's General Assembly caucusing all the Islamic countries as a court order, do you think that it's just simply a case of not understanding, not being capable technically, or do you think it's the natural progression of what the internet is doing, which is democratic values now being sort of coming into conflict with certain regions where democratic values haven't been the norm? So that would be my question.
Okay. On that, on 24th August, Supreme Court of Pakistan upheld Article 19 and Article 19A against the media ban in Pakistan. So that was, I mean, for us, that was a great success. I mean, at least Supreme Court knew what the people's rights are. I think that that particular judge was not assisted by the regulator properly. So he was misled, and over and above, he was influenced by the extremists' rights in the country. And at that time, the court thought that if we will not block Facebook and all these domains which they blocked ultimately, there will be bloodshed. So, I mean, there are 2-3 different things we need to do on this. I mean, and we are really, really trying to pursue different partners, different organizations, different players in this particular field. Number one, we need to work with the lawyers, that they should assist properly to the courts. We need to work with the Judicial Academy in Pakistan, because, number one, we still do not have an ICT tribunal. ICT tribunal is supposed to have a trained judge who knows about how internet ecosystem works. So that's another issue. And other than that, I mean, we need to further, work on progressive policies in the country. So I still think that when at one level, Supreme Court upholds Article 19 and Article 19A, there is still need that they can link all these issues with the internet ecosystem, that how internet works, and then how they should respond to the various issues. So that's what my take on this. Thank you.
I'm Peter Molnar from the Media Studies Center at Central European University, and my question relates to the introduction about steps in the history of internet and free expression. We heard in that about the landmark US court decision that conceptualized the internet as a free space, as opposed to traditional media, radio and television that has been traditionally more regulated than newspapers and other parts of the public sphere. And I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the fact that the European Union, in the middle of which we are sitting here, basically shifted a growing portion of internet content to the more regulated area, the more regulated domain, when it enacted a new directive which replaced the television directive with the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. And while the television directive explicitly said that on-demand content is not covered because there the user is in the position of control of the content she's watching, the new Audiovisual Media Services Directive covers a growing portion of internet content under a relatively narrow definition of what motion picture through the internet is covered, but it's covered. And I'm really concerned about it, and my question is what you think about it, how problematic it is that the European Union is this way conceptualizing the internet as a space, a growing portion of it as a space that can be regulated similarly to television. And I am worried about it that in many authoritarian states, it would come well as a reference point when regulations are extended to the internet as well. Thanks.
It's for me.
Okay, давайте я попробую.
You go and then me, okay?
Okay. Я Не знаю, как это срабатывает у нас в странах СНГ, потому что в каждой стране индивидуально.
I don't know how it works in our
Но
countries,
я
and
хочу
every
на ваш
country
вопрос
is different in
привести
this
такой
case.
пример. Когда я у популярного веб-сайта попросила удалить порнографию с его сайта,
I have a personal example. When I asked the popular website to delete the pornographic content from its website,
он сказал, я этого делать не буду, потому что это бизнес.
I got a response that the website will not do it because it's a business.
Без этой порнографии ко мне не будут ходить юзеры.
And without this pornographic content, the users will not go to this page.
Мне кажется, наша борьба с порнографией это
I think that the fight with pornography is
совсем бесперспективное дело.
Is a way to nowhere.
So, can you hear me? Waiting. I'll just start talking. Thank you. So that's an excellent point. I think it certainly is of concern. As I said in my opening remarks, I think that we're still quite early in the stage of trying to figure out how to regulate the internet, and there's a lot of mistakes to be made in doing so. There is certainly illegal activity that goes on in the internet, and that could and should be and will be prosecuted. And the question is how to identify that and figure out where it's coming from and go after the perpetrators. And I'm in support of that. I'm most worried about the liability for intermediates. And as I understand it, that's still being pretty held sacrosanct in Europe. So I congratulate you on that much. The rest of it, I don't know. We'll wait and see. It is of concern.
The next question, please, from the back. Yeah.
Richard Allen, I'm Director of Policy in Europe for Facebook, so I just want to pick up on a couple of the Facebook points. The first on breastfeeding women, just to be clear that the Facebook rule is that there should be no nudity or pornography on the site. So breastfeeding on its own is not banned, but breastfeeding associated with other nudity may be because of the other nudity. It's one of the examples Rob talked about of social networks having layers of policy on top of one of the general legal rules. We have one around nudity and pornography, but I know that some people interpreted it more negatively than was actually the case. Perhaps more seriously, the issue around the Everybody Draw Muhammad Day cartoons that took place. I think we should be aware that when that broke, and I was about the first person to hear of it because I'm in London, so it arrived with me that we'd been blocked before it got to my US colleagues. That created a huge amount of activity within the company, dozens of people involved, right up to senior management, in trying to decide what we needed to do. The fundamental point was that the Pakistani authorities blocked us before coming to us and requesting a blocking of the particular piece of content. We then entered into discussion with them around whether or not that content should be maintained on the site or what we should do with it. And our view was that it was not hate speech per se. There were people posting hate speech who were not the administrators of that content. They were removed from the site. But the content as a whole was not removed because we felt it did provoke a very valuable and worthwhile political debate. Actually, the groups in opposition gained more members than the group itself, and there was a backwards and forwards, we felt, around important issues. As a result of the discussions with the Pakistani authorities, I think we're in a position now where they understand that they can, if they have judicial authority, request that a specific piece of content be blocked for Pakistan. And that's an approach which, from a speech point of view, is not ideal, but we find preferable and we hope will prevail in the future. Specific content being requested to be banned from specific geographies with clear legal authority, rather than these generic bans which interrupt everyone, as you described.
And will you block human rights activists, and will you block all those people? I mean, government is against them. So, I mean, will you block all those pages? And before that, I would also want to comment on that. Didn't you know that this Ram Ahmad campaign and this whole fiasco will go, it was hate speech and it was such a global issue. And why you were waiting for an application or a contact from the government of Pakistan? I mean, I have this problem with this. I mean, I understand that you have reached to a solution in Brussels probably, and I mean, I understand that you would block on the request of government Pakistan, fine. But I mean, I would want to know that, does it include, for example, my blog? For example, my organization. For example, people who are rallying against government's atrocities. I mean, I can say that, I mean, there is a confidential document which we could scoop from the government, and it says that if, I mean, a content which says something negative about police, about defense forces, about the president, about the ruling party, it will be banned and blocked. And you have any idea that what kind of police we have got in Pakistan? I mean, do you think that if government says that there is a page against the police, you will block it?
I'm speaking at great length this afternoon, so I don't want to dominate this session. I think we'll have an interesting session this afternoon from that. We try and set the bar as high as we can. We try and set the bar as high as we can without the whole service being blocked. And I think generally the experience is, and I say we'll discuss this more later, that normal political speech on Facebook is not interfered with. Where there are very specific local pieces of legislation that are taken to court and a specific court order is requested, we will take that into consideration, but that doesn't mean that we will automatically respond to it. In this case, we did. That doesn't mean we will in every case, particularly if our view is that that content should not be blocked because it is important political speech.
And can I, okay, I just want to raise one more thing. Can you organize a group of people in Pakistan before going to block something? Organize a multi-stakeholder group of people, not only on the instructions or advice of the government, but you can go and talk to them also that, okay, I mean, this is the request. Do you think it is okay to block? I mean, that's one solution I would suggest you.
Coffee break, yeah.
Gentlemen, I would like to kindly request you to continue this fiery discussion over the coffee break. The last question or comment comes from Ellen Hume.
I'm Ellen Hume from CEU. I didn't want to interrupt this flow, but maybe we can continue it as you suggest later. I did want to suggest that breastfeeding is legal publicly in the US. That's really important for the record. And secondly, I've just heard from our colleague from Pakistan about something he thinks could be made different that would improve the situation for freedom of expression in Pakistan. You're hoping Facebook policy might change in some way. So I heard that. But I wondered if the others could make a suggestion as we close the panel. What could be an intervention or a change that is possible that you would like to propose here today that would improve the dire picture that you have made for us today? Just one, who would do it and what would it be? Thank you.
Can you start?
Okay, it's really, I mean, a bit difficult and very complex. But I've already mentioned that there should be fair policies for everyone by the large corporations or by the governments. And we expect the developed countries' governments, for example, EU and the US and other, to influence when such negative things happen in our government. And we really need to work with our judiciary in Pakistan because the judiciary is our only hope right now. We don't have any hopes from other government institutions maybe right now. I mean, because we have a lot of policies, we have constitutional provisions as well, but nobody cares about them. But if we can really bring in the judicial oversight to all these issues, I think we will be doing really good.
I just wanted to go back on breastfeeding for a moment. I don't know, but in India, the news reports that we get from the US is that occasionally women are arrested, etc. So maybe the Indian media has got it completely wrong. But I don't know if this is a standardized, I don't know if it's a standardized regime across the US. On who should do what, I think since Google is paying for this conference, I would like to speak to Google directly. It's not sufficient for Google to end its policy advocacy where it stops getting involved. It's not sufficient for Google to say that we're only concerned about intermediary liability. That is a very selfish policy position. Google must realize that they occupy a very important place in our information society, and their policy advocacy must go beyond their immediate interests.
Great. So a few things I would just in general urge greater tolerance on everyone's part around the world, particularly in respect to breastfeeding. I think greater transparency on the part of all would be very, very helpful. Google has taken some steps forward in this, and I'd like to congratulate them on that. I think I'd like to see more private companies doing the same, and ISPs and others doing that. I think the suggestion to provide more training for legislators, policymakers, and judges is a wonderful idea. I think it's gonna probably a problem that will absorb as much time as energy as we collectively are willing to give it.
У нас такая же сейчас проблема стоит, и мы такое решение сделали сейчас. Контент-провайдеры в Кыргызстане, например, да, то же самое пытаемся внедрять и в других странах СНГ, они разрабатывают свою политику.
Content providers are creating their own policy.
Привлекают очень большую аудиторию и обсуждают вместе с ними.
And they attract a huge audience and discuss it with them.
Такие проблемы мы принимаем по ним общее решение и распространяем ее в интернете.
And we arrived at the common decision and spread it on the internet, and it's working.
То есть контент-провайдеры сейчас главные decision-makers.
So nowadays, content providers are the main decision makers.
And I was told that there was going to be a final contribution from the microphone back in the room.
Hello, my name is Mohammed Abdullah. I'm a human rights activist and blogger from Syria. You know, we have this controversial fatwa about adult breastfeeding, but I'm not here to talk about it. My question for Rob, for OpenNet Initiative, we really do appreciate the reports. Okay. We really do appreciate the reports OpenNet issued about filtering, especially in Syria and Tunisia. However, some of the governments who are sponsoring OpenNet initiative, or not sponsoring, who are really taking the lead on defending of human rights and freedom of expression, are developing the softwares these governments are using to block these websites. For instance, Canada developed the software, Secure Computing developed the software called Deep Packet Inspection, who's being used in Tunisia to arrest bloggers and to search their mails. And Syria, for instance, just bought for $12 million a big server from Spain to monitor the internet and filter the internet. And OpenNet Initiative have never mentioned these things. And I'm really surprised when I see these governments lobbying and sponsoring like events just to defense of freedom of expression. And at the same time, they allow to do these things. For instance, when Canada complained, or when Secure Computing complained about the Iran usage of this software in 2009 election, they complained because Iran used the software without paying money. They did not buy the software. They used unlicensed version, not because of using the software and blocking the content. Thank you.
So thank you for that comment. Sir, I think that the use of software produced in the West used for repressing political speech, I think, is a serious problem and needs to be addressed in a more serious way. The OpenNet Initiative has pointed that out at points. At times, one of the troubles for us is it's very hard to really identify and find solid evidence that particular software is being used in different instances. We did point out the use of software in Iran. That was many, many years ago. Iran is now developing their own software to take care of that problem and has solved that. But smart filter is still being used in many countries around the world, and I don't think that's gotten as much attention as it deserves.
Thank you very much for the last comment and the last response. I would like to thank all the panelists for giving us enough food for thought and the fuel for a very, very exciting discussion. And I would like to invite the entire audience for coffee, and we reconvene according to the program in half hour's time.
Hi everyone, welcome to this next session of this conference. I'm Madeline Morris, I'm going to be moderating for the session. I'll introduce myself first of all. I'm unashamedly old school media. I'm a broadcaster for the BBC. I present The World Today, which is on the BBC World Service, and our interactive program called World Have Your Say, which some of you hopefully will have heard of. We speak with a lot of bloggers and internet activists on that particular subject. I first of all need to declare a vested personal interest in this conference. I need you. The BBC needs you. CNN needs you. New York Times needs you. Every single old school media, lamestream media, as Sarah Palin so fondly calls us, we all need you guys. And we need you more and more because you bring us stories that we can't see. You bring us images that we can't see. You let us know about things that are going on that we don't necessarily know about. And so for that, thank you very much because you play an increasingly important role in what we do. And that's just going to improve more and more, and we're going to rely on you more and more because, as I'm sure you're aware, in no small part, due to the internet, old school media is